All right, let's do it. We got 10 people here and together, 11 now, so maybe we'll pick up a couple more here in the next couple of minutes. But if there's any chance that you don't know who I am, my name is Benji Balmer. I live in Mount Vernon, Ohio, and about 8 years ago now, I started a company called the Yellowbird Food Shed that really aims to um, find and marry the consumer to the place where that food is coming from. It turns out that it's a tool that a lot of us need, really probably arguably all of us need to be able to be our best version of ourselves. A great diet, and it's not always easy to find that tool for the toolbox. So when I started that, we started here in Mount Vernon, and we're really selling into Columbus, and we've built that up over the last, really 7 years. The first year was a pretty slow going thing, but then in the middle of all that, have just gained a following and a group of people that have really gone beyond the scope of food. It's really become a movement. It's really become an open forum for discussion about all kinds of things. And the cool part about that is that we all still kind of gather around food, assuming you can, you still eat, which is all of us. And, but then that's expanded to other things. And so I saw on Instagram, a gal, Jessica Burton, who had been a member of ours, with the Yellowbird. And I'd seen other things she'd posted before, but she had posted a book that she had read and was encouraging others to read called The Conversation. And so I got it and began kind of right away reading it, but then reached out to her and said, hey, would you be interested in leading us or a group of anybody interested through the content of that book? And without hesitation, that I can gather, I wasn't talking to her, it was a text message kind of through Instagram, but she came back and said absolutely. And we've just worked out the details between then and now. So presumably you have a copy of the book if you're on this call. And I don't know how far you've read, but it's broken into 12 chapters. And so we're going to basically try to cover in 6 sessions. If it goes longer or shorter, that's fine. But, every other Tuesday, we can gather. If you can't make it, no big deal. We will post the recording to anybody that's interested in watching that or listening to that. But at this point in the evening, I'm just going to turn the discussion or the handles over to Jessica and let her do her thing. And we can all, at the appropriate times, participate as needed. Jessica, it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Benji, for that really, really warm and sweet welcome. I'm so happy to be here. And as he said, we didn't know how this would transpire, but I was so happy to hear that he was interested in wanting to read the book and learn more. And I will say that Yellowbird is in great company. This book is being facilitated in many companies throughout at least Central Ohio. I know Cardinal Health is one and many others. So it's not just us that's doing this, but it really is becoming more of a community effort. And Dr. Robert Livingston is not a stranger to Columbus in Ohio. So he's really passionate about the work that he's doing. And I hope that over time, you'll be able to get some things out of it and to really delve into it. And I just want to thank you, first of all, for showing up. Thank you for participating, bringing your curiosities, your inquiries. My hope is that you'll come with your entire self, however that comes, for the discussion, for the dialogue, that you'll work through a lot of your thoughts, unpack your thoughts, even as good or unbecoming that they may be, or you think they are, or that they sound, to feel them and embrace them. And there will be some challenging, maybe enlightening, maybe not so enlightening things, but I hope that you'll welcome some renewal and learning and growth throughout this throughout these discussions. And one of the things that I really appreciate that Dr. Livingston highlights is that this book is, it's not a history lesson. It's not a let's come down on people who don't understand or really try to, nail you the truth, which is not it. It really provides an opportunity to have discussions like this in safe spaces and to create safe spaces to have the conversations. I know, and I will say this up front, I'm not easily offended. So feel free as you're sharing to really think about that and really delve into it. And I hope that you'll feel that way with others that are in the group, and not necessarily vulnerability, but a freedom to share and to grow. So I hope you get that from this. So how this is going to go, this is our first session. So, I mean, it's a conversation. My thought is to introduce the chapters and the topics, giving a high level overview of what we'll discuss, and then start with some things that resonated with me and open it up for question and dialogue. Feel free to use the chat feature. Raise your hand, unmute yourself, or use the little reaction or whatever you'd like, if that's helpful for you. But I hope that we'll be able to delve in and really get some juice out of it. So today we're starting with chapters 1 and 2. Do we all believe that racism is real, which is the first chapter, and then the second chapter of what is racism anyway? And one of the things that I got out of the book, I mean, there's so many things, but even just from its introduction, and I will say I rarely read introductions or prefaces or anything like that, but I'm very happy that I did with this one. I wanted to write these down because I wanted to make sure that I captured them. I also provide in my notes page numbers. So if you want to know exactly where I'm pulling some things from, I'm happy to give you those page numbers as well. Just feel free to just raise your hand or shout out. So I really appreciate Dr. Livingston's approach in that although it is an ambitious endeavor, there is optimism that we can collectively make progress towards solving the problem of racism. And we'll get into it a little bit more about discussing the problem factor of that as well. And he mentions that the goal of the conversation is to bring people together to talk honestly about race, creating profound and sustainable change, and that this book is to be a powerful tool for bringing people together and developing support for lasting solutions. And also that this is a fact-based book. I think this is why I was just so drawn into the book, is that it's fact-based, it's science-based, it's evidence-based. It's not an autobiography or personal thoughts in that regard, but a roadmap and a compass as we share in this journey to be more racially just and equitable. And I love that he uses racial equity as being the achievable goal, not equality, which we'll talk more about, but I love that he leads with equity versus equality. And that if people are given the opportunity to have a conversation and also be exposed to new information, it can make a difference. And that's a belief that I hope to carry throughout this, and also in my pattern, as this book has really also helped to change my thinking as well. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, that this is not coming from a place of confrontation or bashing, but he does objectively lay out the facts, which were just kind of eye-opening for me, and he confronts them and exposes them, and I hope we will use this too as a way to confront our thoughts, to confront what we read and talk about in our experiences, and so I hope that that's something that you'll bring as we're going through this. So I'll start with chapter 1, and I just have like a few starter questions. This isn't like I ask and you speak, but hopefully as we get a little bit warmer with each other, it'll be a way to facilitate this. So if you started reading the book, chapter 1 resonates and opens with, do we all believe that racism exists? And I just wanted to know, what were your initial thoughts just from the title of that chapter? Just like some thoughts. You're like, oh yeah, of course it does, but does it really? And sharing some of your thoughts on that.
Okay, I'll share. Someone's got to break the ice, right? This has been a topic I've been delving into for the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years, the research has morphed and changed throughout that time. But I'm finding in the last couple of years, there's so much work on defining, like, racist is, it's a verb, not a noun or an adjective. And I'm finding that the more I read different people explaining what that means, it's super helpful. And I'm finding that in his work, I'm liking it because I feel like it's taking other things that I've learned about and read about, discussed in other discussion groups, but it's honing it in. And like you said, it's the facts and it's the evidence. I don't know. I feel like he gives some really clear-cut ways that you can talk about. So yes, racism exists. It does exist. There's no question there. But for me, I'm liking how this is molding things together. And I didn't have a very clear-cut answer, but I figured I'd break the ice since nobody else was unmuting. So
yeah, thank you, Mindy. That's great. That's so great. And also, like, one of the things that I appreciate about him and speaking to the flow of the book is that he also mentions at the beginning that there are 3 parts to the book, but to take each part as it comes and not to jump to the end, which I really appreciate, because if you do jump to the end, I feel like you're just going to miss the entire thing, in my opinion. And one of the things that he confronts is the thought processes and the science and the theory behind when something is a problem. And it's like, are you really acknowledging that it's a problem, or if you don't agree that it's a problem? And that basic thought, forget racism for a second and just kind of put that at the back of your head, but really acknowledging, like, is this a problem? And whether your answer is yes or no dictates the rest of what your thought process is, and not just, that's just like in everyday life. And I really like how he puts kind of those theories into place and to really start thinking about that too. One of the things that he kind of marries together in chapter 1 is how many people are wedded to the view that the world is just and fair, and that the very existence of racism violates that theory, especially when it comes to how some white people think, well, if racism is bad, I can't be bad because I believe the world is just and fair. So that makes me feel like a bad person. And then it delves also into the concept of white fragility, which I know that that's kind of been in the media and circulating really heavily over the last several months to the better part of a year, which that argument is that white desire to see themselves as good people, which leads to defensive-ness around recognizing and acknowledging their own biases. And I wonder, and obviously I'm not white, but I wonder, like, for those like who have experiences with that and confronting that, if that's something that you've had to confront or experience or really acknowledge to yourself, that a thought that you had, or in the way you interacted with the person, how you confronted your own bias and was probably a little bit taken aback that, wow, I have this bias and I feel this way. I wonder if there's some type of experiences that any on this call have had about that.
You don't mind? Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff. It's fine.
No, please go ahead.
Well, it's been interesting to me. I am the white mother of 2 Black kids, and they are 21 and 17 now. So I've been living with them for a very long time. They were adopted when they were babies, and so I have over the years watched myself having thoughts and having reactions being in communities of color, because I'm doing that on purpose, because I'm raising children who need to be with people who look like them, and going into experiences where I am the minority and maybe I'm the only white person in the room. And I've always felt comfortable there. But what's caught me off guard in places where I have felt like, boy, Siobhan, I can't believe you're having that thought, is, oh, I'm in an unfamiliar place. It's at night, it's dark, and there's a Black man that walks by. And I look around to make sure, and it's like, I don't have any reason to feel afraid. I don't think that I do feel afraid, but there is that conditioned thing that's, I mean, no offense to, Jeff or Benji, but I might have also been just afraid if it had been a white man walking and I was alone in the dark. But, there are those types of situations where I find myself thinking, I don't think I have these biases, but then whoops, there it is. And so
That's an awesome point, Saban. All I was going to add to this, Jessica, to your question personally, was as a white guy at a tech company and having read Robin DiAngelo's book and whatnot, and also we're trying to build up our culture of diversity and embracing it and seeing ourselves for the seeing ourselves in the ways, in all the ways that we've been blind. I try to, well, notwithstanding right now, I try to speak less and listen more because I am not aware of my own biases a lot of times until I'm aware of it. And a lot of people are actually afraid to say it because I come from a place of safety. I have privilege, but a lot of people don't. And I'm not going to catch that unless I shut the hell up. Thank you.
No, that's good. That's really encouraging. And I hope that as we're talking through this and sharing your experiences and stories, that it really helps to facilitate other candor around the discussions that we have, and to feel free to really like share that in a way that it would be meaningful. One of the places that I wanted to jump to in chapter 2, which I feel like resonated with me so much, that speaking to what is racism anyway, and I'm kind of just like jumping around, but I will say I recall when I read this for the first time and when I saw this photo, and in chapter 2 it starts, if you have the book with you, on page 21, and there is this photo of a study of two little girls, a white girl and a black girl. And if you just look at these photos, what is your initial thought of what happened? And that's the first one of the little black girl, and there's the white girl that's on the ground. So the part of this study was, what was your initial thought and reaction of when you first saw that photo? And then they made a second one of the opposite. So the white girl is in the part of standing and the black girl is on the ground. And so you start to think of these theories of automatically what happened. I know that I have my own that I'll probably share, because I really wanted to take it at face value and act like I didn't read anything else, and just to really take the test on my own, basically. And so when I saw the little black girl here, and then the white girl on the floor or the ground on the very first page, this really talks about kind of like the subtle behaviors and thoughts, and really starts to get into that part of racism that some people don't believe is real, but is a real thing. I made up a story with the first photo that the white girl probably said something to her or did something to her in class, and she had the opportunity and she pushed her off the swing. And in fact, I had to check myself and was like, I probably would have done the same thing if I was little like that, not gonna lie. But then the other one is where the white girl pushes the black girl off the swing. And we don't know, the point of the story and the tests and the literature is that you don't know what happened. And it provided opportunities for people to give their own thoughts of what they thought happened and why they thought the way that they did. And also speaking to the punishments or reactions from others, versus like if a white girl pushes a black girl down versus like the white girl or the black girl pushing the white girl down, and what that can mean. and how those are taken differently. So I don't know if others want to share some thoughts of what they thought about when they saw this, or if they did the test on their own or read ahead. I tried to do the test on my own, like I said. But really speaking to implicit bias and unconscious bias, you already think that, oh, the Black girl pushed the white girl down, and it's more offensive for her versus the other way around. So I wanted to like kind of get your thoughts on how we talk about implicit and unconscious bias, and how just that small exercise really shows me that, I mean, I clearly made up the story, so I know where my biases are and I'm working on them, but like we all have them. So I'm curious just to kind of hear some of your thoughts on how this played out.
I think I'm going to be brave and tell a story that I thought of, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So I'm from Cincinnati, and as soon as I saw this, like the photo exercise, and was reading about the implicit bias and like unintentional associations that we make, I instantly thought of a story, and I'm feel comfortable enough to share it with you guys. But in like 5th grade, I accused Marlena Reynolds of stealing my Charlie's Angel soundtrack CD instantly, because I remember being in the gymnasium, and I instantly couldn't find it. And I went straight to accusing her. And Marlena was a young Black girl. We were the same age. And I implicitly, like that unconscious bias just seeped right into my head, because I couldn't find my CD and I was pissed. So I went straight to Marlena and I started accusing her, and we got into like a verbal argument. I was 12 years old. And just even looking at these, just the little diagrams and the illustrations, I instantly thought of that story. And I was like, I did that when I was younger. I did that. Mm-hmm. And I can understand, like you said, so much of the evidence and the psychological theories behind Dr. Livingston's book are important for us to understand, like how our minds digest information and how we're conditioned and things like that, and how those implicit bias manifest themselves in our actions. And guess what? She didn't take my CD. I lost it. And I found it later on that day, and I felt awful. Like I still remember it. This is 20 years later. I still remember this.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, because it's real. It's really real.
Just jumping in. So last year I did a leadership training where they actually had us take the Harvard bias test, which I'm happy to share. But when we were supposed to take it overnight and come back as a group and share our results, and I remember thinking, we're all going to come back, and the point is that whatever your race you have, that is what you're biased towards. And I was actually very surprised that I was actually Black biased. And in talking with our coach that was talking through us, she actually shared that it has a lot to do with what you're saying, is how you grow up. And my best friend growing up was Black from Burkina Faso. So for me, I have like very fond associations. And I think that's what these illustrations also show, is like, at the heart of it, what did you grow up? And that kind of dictates your lens. So thank you for sharing, Meredith. But yes, I think it's really how you grow up too. Because I was surprised too that I didn't get white biased. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julia.
I will share it if anybody's curious to do a little self-discovery.
Thank you. I will say that to the point of how you grew up and what you're around, if for those of you on this call who don't know, I'm originally from Dallas. I've been living in Columbus for about 7 years. I moved here when I was about 27 years old, so very much grown. And I will say there's racism everywhere, but when I moved to the Midwest, it felt very different to me. A whole type of different lifestyle, at least at least in Dallas, like if people don't like you or race, they'll at least say it to your face and you know it. At least in here, it's like the subtle small things of Midwest nice is what I was always hear. And I'm like, these people aren't nice, they're strange. Sorry, like I wasn't trying to like be mean, but it was just a lot of things that I had to work through. And things that I noticed here that I wouldn't say sheltered is the right word, but it kind of felt that way a little bit. And people really not understanding that things like this are real, or and another segue into the book that I noticed, especially living in Columbus, because it's quite progressive compared to a lot of cities. I mean, here, Cleveland, Cincinnati. But the starting on page 26, when it talks about aversive racism theory and egalitarian values, and this one was really struck me as very interesting, is that people with those values, especially white, believing that they are unbiased and treat everyone the same, because it's like, oh, like I believe that, you know, we're all, I hate to say, all in this together, and like not, I don't see anything that's kind of different or wrong. And on page 28, it's interesting that I found this more so to be true, living in a more of like progressive kind of Midwest area, that those people would say it had nothing to do with being Black. And worse still, when white people support one Black person, research indicates that they run the risk of becoming more racially biased against other Black people. And that struck me because some of the things in this book were really like, I had thought those things and I couldn't really articulate them or explain them. And he does a lot of this very well here. But I noticed that when you're in more progressive cities, or, you know, living gentrification in neighborhoods where some white people move into neighborhoods and kind of, you know, make them better. But it's like, how could I be racist? I voted for Obama. I'm living, you know, off of Parsons in South Columbus on the South side. Like, there's no way that I could be that. And in fact, it kind of makes it worse because it's almost like a step up, if you will, like kind of like a check off the box. And that was a concept and a theory that I didn't really understand of why that is. And that he describes this kind of like delusion of a disturbing paradox here. And I just really kind of leaned into that as I was reading and reviewing, to show like, I'm not crazy, like I see this happening, but also that's another form of racism or showing bias that I don't think is talked about very much. So I wonder if anyone else has really had the experience like with their friends, or, you know, the group of white friends. It's like, oh, I have, you know, the one Black friend that's always in our group, you know, type of thing. So it makes them feel better about themselves. I don't know if that's something that you've experienced, or if that's something that's, if you have, it's been hurtful or any type of way. But just curious to kind of know more about that.
It made me think of, so I think it was when Obama first ran. I was a poll worker, and you just kind of escort people to the machines and whatever. And so this what appeared to be like a middle-aged white man was like, yeah, I'm ready to vote. And I was like, okay, you know. and he said, Negro or not, I'm voting for Barack. And he didn't say Negro. And I said, excuse me? He said, oh, I'm voting for Obama. And I said, press the green button. I don't know what you want me to do with that. And so what was, and he like wanted me to be over there to like to see that he actually did. Like I said, I can't do that. Like, just, you know. So it was this very interesting, like, I feel like in my experience, people who identify as white are more interested in not being labeled racist than actually working against racism. Like,
Yes.
Like they just want to deflect like everything I got. Like, let's make sure I'm not don't ever call me that, instead of like actually paying attention to the ways in which racism is happening. I don't know if anybody heard like Sharon Osbourne going off on the, and it's like you too worried about the label and you're not really thinking about how racism is actually manifesting. And so I could imagine this man, if somebody said to him, oh, well, you're doing this racist thing, he's like, I can't be racist. Like, I voted for Obama. And I think there's this very interesting way in which people define racism based on proximity.
Yeah.
Like, I can't be racist. I have like a Black friend, or I was raised in a multicultural environment. Like, I'm in close proximity, like physical proximity to folks who are not white. But it's very odd because when people say that, I say, well, slavery required a lot of closeness, like actual intimacy. Like, so, like you can't, like it's not a good response. So no. It's quite interesting how people define how racism actually looks, what it looks like, and all of the ways in which people attempt to kind of deflect the label instead of actually doing the work to not be whatever it is people are labeling them for doing.
Absolutely. And that reminds me, oh, Mandy, I saw you unmuting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, I'm just going to throw this out there. This has been really interesting for me. I've been, I don't mean to turn this into anything, but I'm just going to share it, really politically involved for a while. And I'm a white woman living in a suburb. And I have connections with lots of very progressive people. And it is eye-opening to me that I've met, and there are a lot of women that are involved in a progressive movement. So I've met a lot more women. A lot of people have read 2 books. You know, I read Stamped and I had the discussion, blah, blah, blah. And I read blah, blah, blah. And I just had a conversation yesterday with one of my closest friends. And she's reading a history book. It's a white man, and it's called, who's a very prominent historian, American Nations. And I was so thrown off by the title. I figured it was about Native American Indian nations, and it's not. It's about the white groups that settled all around the country. And I taught American history to 8th graders. So like I was questioning her about the title, and then I was questioning her about the history, and I was saying, but what about the people who were there, and what about, and finally I said, I don't need to read this history. This is what was in the textbooks that I taught. I need to get other perspectives. But my point to that is that she's a very progressive, very liberal person, and it's got to be so frustrating for people of color, Black, brown, to see so many progressives saying they're doing the work, many of us thinking we're doing the work, but we can shut the door and walk in our house and shut it. That's that white privilege that Jeff was talking about. We don't have to be at the rallies. Like when COVID was going on, I was like, oh my God, I would so be downtown every day, but I'm staying home to keep myself safe. And then I'm like, I have the privilege. I have an income, I'm, and there have to be a lot of really uncomfortable conversations to go on to make people understand this. And I so appreciate what Melissa said. I mean, I hadn't even thought to go there, but the descriptions of like that proximity, and I read this book, I know this person, I voted for Obama, I went to 2 rallies, I have a Black Lives Matter sign in my yard. Like, that's all great, that's a start, but there's so much more. So the fact that we're even having this conversation right now with like total strangers is amazing to me. Like, I don't know anyone on this call.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know Benji. I feel like I do because of the emails, and I buy food. I've been buying from Yellow just for a year, but anyway, I'll stop. But I just so appreciative that this is even happening.
Thanks, Mindy. I was going to follow up on that real quick. I raised my hand, but I'm not sure how to unraise it.
I want to go away.
I think Dr. Livingston really hit this on the nail when he was talking about stickers versus tattoos, right? You know, we, all of us do things that are unkind, very minimally, but then racist for sure. And so it's not something that we are inherently racist, but we can act in that way. And it's thoughtless behavior, it's ignorant behavior most of the time. And we need to learn when that happens. Hopefully we have an opportunity for someone to help us see differently. But that to me spoke about really the ways in which racism is so subtle and pervasive, right?
I agree. And interestingly enough, this conversation kind of circles back to chapter 1, where I thought it was so inviting that he spoke about a story where he was doing a facilitation and coaching in Appalachia, of all places, and with a group of white men, white collar, some blue collared, and asked them if they really thought that racism was real, and that if Black people had the same opportunity and if those opportunities were there. And it's almost like it didn't become about race, it became about class, which those things are very different. And even so, some of their answers is like, well, how can there be racism, or how do Black people not have the same opportunities as us? One of the things that they say on page 6, like, is these from this group: when I turn on the TV, I see Obama, Oprah, Jay-Z, Beyonce, all these rich, famous Black people, and yet I live in a trailer and they're doing a hell of a lot better than me. And the thought that like 5 or 6 famous Black people show everyone that, okay, everything is eradicated and it's gone, it was almost that was eye-opening to me, because it's like this is really a thought that they feel less than because Black people still are kind of in this realm that if there's one or a few, then they've made it and we shouldn't even be talking about this. And the other exercise that he asked was to name how many Fortune 500 CEOs are Black. I mean, they thought almost 1/5, about 80 or so. They almost thought there should be 100 by now, because this is what they see in the media, when it's really only 5. And so it's kind of that dichotomy of missing that resonated with me. And it helped me to think about, wow, when I walk around just in my own life, people that are probably quote worse off than me class wise or income wise or whatever, think not only have I made it, but oh, she's Black and made it, so I've probably had some help, or think I'm better than whoever, and all of this kind of thing. And really walking around thinking like that. And I've heard growing up, like, some white people that thought that, like, oh, like, Oprah's on TV, like, of course, like, you've got it, like, you've made, like, we've given something to you, so you should just stop talking about this, when it really shouldn't be that way. So I don't know, like, if that kind of like resonated with you, about these literally smart white men in a group talking about, of course this is not a thing because they're Black famous people, and I guess they think they're all famous and rich, so which is not the case. So I don't know if like y'all have had some thoughts about that either.
The thing that struck me about that, and I mean, I like Melissa's point about there's always been rich Black people. I mean, it just hasn't, white people haven't paid attention to it throughout history. But what struck me about that in looking at that example is that they pulled 4 or 5 famous, well-to-do Black people who were popular across the country. And they thought, well, that should speak for all of the Black people in this country. But if Dr. Livingston had asked them, okay, well, I turn on the TV and I see, Dan Rather and, some white rock star and a white actor. I mean, I can't think of people's names off the top, but, 4 or 5 well-to-do white men and men, or men and women.
Mhm.
Do you gentlemen then think that speaks to all of white people? I mean, is it the same as yours? And the
Mhm.
fact that they can't make that connection that, okay, well, I don't relate. I mean, me as a, suburban mom, I don't think I can relate to Britney Spears or, some very famous, well-off white person any more than, so, but that those guys didn't seem to think about that, that there was a difference between all Black people and these four examples. But there's definitely a difference between all white people and these four examples. And that dissonance
Mhm.
I have, I mean, it's like I see it, but I don't, I'm not sure why people don't see it,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, it goes back to perception versus reality, right?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. I thought it was an interesting parallel to when he was encouraging people to do the work, when he was also talking about global warming. And he said, why is it so hard for people to, the perception versus the reality, and doing the homework with global warming versus racism, and why some people just feel like, oh, it's a quota and they pass on.
Mhm.
So.
There's something
Mhm.
that I think oftentimes folks, when we have like a race conversation, as you mentioned, Jessica, they conflate it with class, which isn't always accurate. And so what I say in those situations, I say you have to ask yourself, as a person who is white, who may be impoverished or working class, are you in that position because you are white?
Mhm.
And then that's the question, right? So we can point to systems that have compromised wealth acquisition for Native Americans, for Black folks, for like we can point to direct systemic things that have shifted or impacted the racial wealth gap.
Mhm.
Particularly since most people's the most easiest access to wealth is through home ownership. So through a combination of redlining and covenants and gentrification has taken those opportunities for people of color to build wealth, right? So we can point to race implicating like your access to wealth and assets. And so when you ask folks to say, is your poverty grounded in your race, or is it something else, right? Maybe because your geographic location, because of industrialization, because of something else. And I think when you ask folks to say that there are times in which race and class can work together, but when we're actually having a race conversation, we have to be real clear that we're talking about race. If we're talking about class, if we're talking about regionalism, if we're talking about other things, then being clear that that's what we mean. And I think the other thing, going back to what Mindy was talking about, this idea of liberal and progressive, I always like when people, not you in particular, Mindy, but just in general, people are like, well, I'm liberal. And it's like,
No, I agree. I'm not offended.
I don't know what you mean by that exactly, because if we read, for example, Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, he essentially says, I'm dealing with all kinds of white people, and there's different kinds of white supremacy. I'm dealing with the Ku Klux Klan, and I'm dealing with the white moderate, which is essentially the white liberals. So the Ku Klux Klan, we all know what their goal is, but the white moderates were like, yes, we think you're doing a great job, we're donating, but do you need a protest like that? Like, do you really need all of these rights? Like, why do you want stuff so quickly? And he's like, how do you feel so privileged to determine my freedom and when I get it? And like thinking about how even, and I imagine they did the equivalent of I voted for Obama, like I've donated to your campaign, like I'm marching with you, but I just don't think you need all of those things right now. Like I don't think you're a little too angry, right? And so the ways in which these other ways in which like white supremacy can show up, even with folks who identify themselves as whatever it means to be liberal progressive. Because I think too often folks will be like, I'm just not those white people, right? And so they say whatever it means to not be those folks. I'm not the folks that was at the Capitol. I'm not the folks doing that. So I've created this other box, a very general box of like not that, which is sometimes get labeled as progressive and liberal, which isn't. Like I need some more clarification what you mean by that.
I 100% agree. And speaking to your point earlier about the not associating the systemic pieces that are intertwined and ingrained of why Black people don't, like how we don't accumulate wealth and how we haven't generationally. And speaking to like the white people being poor, and is it about class versus race? And do you have that because you're white? Like one of the things my mom has said when my mom is crazy, forgive her, but when she's like seeing, like white people and they're poor complaining about, they're not as equal, as Black people, my mom's like, you've been white long enough to have some money, so I don't have any empathy. Like stuff like that, where there's some thoughts where people really think like, that's hard to grasp, is on the other side is like you can just show up in the world and it's fine for you, where like that's some things that we don't kind of get to experience. And so those are some thoughts at like on either side, whether they're good or bad or unbecoming, is how people really feel. And it's interesting that you bring up this systemic piece, because he ends chapter 2 kind of just sticking a little bit on the edge of the systemic piece, and how he and it's on page 33, and speaking of systemic racism, he uses the salmon and the stream analogy, which, I mean, shout out to Yellowbird, who has great salmon, by the way. I know that's not speaking about this in particular, but like really weaving this like throughout the book. And I will say that this, the way that he uses this analogy at times, like as we get later on in the chapters, threw me off a little bit. But really looking at the differences between systemic racism and thinking about it as like currents and undercurrents, and like how that you have no control over that, but yeah, you're swept into it because this is the way the system is, and how you're the salmon fighting to get upstream. So that part was very so interesting, and speaking to the systems of oppression that were formed. And one of the things he delves into, and he talks about it in chapters 3 and 4, is that how people don't believe these systems exist, which I still floors me to this day. And living in Columbus, and I live like on the South Side, and it didn't dawn on me, the redlining thing, for example, until I really lived over here to see 71 going through King Lincoln, and also like the intentionality of building the bridge that bridges downtown into King Lincoln, and why that's so important. And so that really resonated with me as well. And that talks about kind of the systemic things, and also going into privilege and white privilege and what that looks like. And I will say, and I told this to Benji as we've been talking, this won't probably be until the 3rd session where we get to chapter 5. That chapter was hard for me. I right before reading it, and chapter 5 is, how does threat perpetuate racial inequality? And I remember being younger that my mom started talking to me about, you just showing up in the world and being competent and doing the things that you're supposed to do is a threat to others. And I never really understood that, because kind of how Melissa was saying, and using it in a different way, of course, that like, you're fine being over here, but when you start to cross into other things that are not meant for you or built for you, it starts to become a problem. And he addresses that so much more eloquently than I ever could. But I know that chapter will be something that I had a hard time getting through, but I really look forward to just like talking through it with everyone. Does anyone have any like kind of overarching comments or thoughts or anything like that?
How about that question from Melissa in the chat? What do people
Yeah.
feel about him saying anyone, regardless of race, can be racist?
Yes.
that's what I was going to respond to was Melissa's question, because when I read that, I stopped and it was like, wait, no, that's not right. People who are the recipients of racism aren't racist. And so it challenged at least it challenged for me, my perception of racism being a systemic and more white issue problem versus being anywhere.
Mhm.
I think that kind of goes to, I would say it's true.
Mhm.
The how to be an anti-racist goes to kind of what at the beginning when I was talking about racist being anti-racist is like it's like a verb, or racist, it's a verb, it's not a noun or an adjective. Like, you know, you're racist or not racist in a specific, or not racist, anti-racist. You're racist or anti-racist in a specific moment. So it fluctuates.
Mhm.
I mean, some of us are more in one space than others, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of merit in that. I mean, that would be a deep conversation to have, but
Mhm. Yeah, I think about that, like, the other side of that, and I couple that with, like, so if it's a white person that is being racist or having, you know, racist tendencies to a black person, is it like, is the black person responding being racist, or are they responding out of anger because of how this person has treated me? You know, like I go back and forth with that, because it's like, I get it, but then at the same time, it's like, does that mean I don't like white people? Am I like mad, or am I doing this because I'm mad at them or what they said to me, or whatever, like something like that. That's just like a personal kind of thought I toy with. Is yes, I agree that anybody, regardless of their race, can be racist and have those.
I might have explained something wrong. Now I feel
Oh,
like
no,
I
not
said-
no, not
no,
singularity.
for you, Melissa, was your question, did you mean can black people be racist against black people? Or did you mean is it because I think racism has to do with privilege.
So I think so. Livingston essentially says anybody can be racist to anybody. So whether that's
Okay, I didn't
being
answer that
racist
question.
to other black people being racist to white people being racist to other white people being racist to Native Americans, like everybody can be racist. And I struggle with that.
Yeah.
I struggle with it. And I struggle, and even after reading Kendi's book, How to Be Anti-Racist, I struggle because he has the same argument, and I struggle with it because race was created to create white supremacy.
Right.
Period. That's the only reason race was created, because there was no concept of race prior to that, right? So that's the only reason we have race, is for white supremacy to be created, right? And so for me, he gave an example of like an African American, or like I think he said like a Jamaican being racist against an African American. To me, that is more so folks upholding white supremacist constructs, right? And to me, that means the foundation is always white supremacy. Now, anybody can choose to not uphold white supremacist constructs. I know plenty of white people who are doing that, as he said, folks who are going against the current, but I also know people of color who are also like working with the current, like, you know, so there's ways in which we can uphold those constructs, right? But like, I think it almost needs another word. And I think for some sociologists, they'll say, well, when, let's say, an Asian person is being racist against like a Mexican, like that's, but is it, but my question is like, what is the grounding of that, right? Is it xenophobia? Like, if it's xenophobia, like, is that grounded in this kind of American context about who gets to be American and who's not, which is very much grounded in that settler mentality, which goes back to the book you're talking about, Mindy, this idea of like who gets to be defined as American or not, which goes back again, the foundation is always white supremacy. So so to me, it's like, it's tricky. It's like it needs another word that hasn't been created yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Oh.
it's like you're supporting a system or you're going against it. So I do believe in this idea of kind of like not being this neutral space. But I do think there needs to be also like this third column, not just racist or anti-racist. Like it needs some other column, because if you're not actively working against it, I don't think that your default should be racist. I think it should be I don't know what that is, but it should be something else.
Yeah, I agree. Meredith, and then we'll get to Jeff really quickly.
Melissa just blew my mind for a second. So now I'm like, because I had been, how do I put my hand? I don't want to have my hand raising this whole time. Lower hand. There we go. I have seen like bias and racism towards African immigrants against American Black people. And it like blew my mind because, so then Melissa, when you were talking about like what is the foundation in that, and from my perspective, when I saw it happening, I was so confused because the Somali women that I know did not want to be associated as Black Americans to white people. They didn't want to be associated or seen the way that they perceive white people to perceive Black Americans. They didn't want to be seen that way. And I think the foundation that holds that up is the system. They didn't want to be, they saw the, I mean, they came to this country and they saw what was happening and they picked up on it really quick. So they could see the social inner workings of the US, and they didn't want to be on the receiving end of that. And I was like, totally like, so I'm still marinating on it too. And I was shocked by it to this day.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Jeff, did you have something?
Just really briefly, I promise.
No, you're fine.
Well, that last link I posted was a book I read 2 years ago. It's a history of the indigenous peoples of the Americas by an indigenous person. And that one really like blew my mind, because this one, for me anyway, held the key historically of not just racism towards Africans, but indigenous people, Irish, all over the place. And it was white Christians. And there was some, and I'm on like the maximum dose of statins, so my memory is like this long right now. But there was something in European history that was like some type of doctrine that said, you know, if you're Christian, then you're deserving, and if you accept our religion and you're white, then we'll not harm you. But if you're not and you don't speak our language, then that's not our fault. Therefore, you're less. Like the Buffalo Soldiers, we used Black people to eradicate the indigenous people across the West to get them out of our area because they had guns, because we weaponized them and we let them kill each other. And this book is so incredible. I cannot highly recommend this enough. It's heartbreaking, but the historical foundation of, and she doesn't really go into racism, she's going into like genocide. In this case, in our case for this conversation, it is racism, and fortunately not successfully genocide, but there's a crossroad somewhere in here. Sorry.
No, thank you. I actually clicked on the link, so it's up for me to browse after this call. I'm actually very surprised at how fast an hour went, and I'm also very surprised that we've been able to share this much as strangers. And I'm really excited. I know a couple of you personally, 2 or 3, so I'm so happy that you came. And I sent an email. If you want to pop in for one session, that's great. If you want to like come in at a later time, or 2 or 3, that's fine too. I want this to be just a safe space to have this and to talk about it. And if you're up for it again, we would love to see you again in a couple of weeks. But I will turn it over to Benji to close us out.
Thank you. I had set this up for an hour initially, and then I'm so unfamiliar with Zoom, I didn't know what would happen after an hour if we went longer, like if the computers would explode or something. So I ended up setting it for 90 minutes, which bought us a little bit of a buffer time. I'll close with this. This is the only, when I read, I have a system of which I mark in the margins, and the most important thing gets 3 asterisks. And this is the only thing in the first 2 chapters that got 3 asterisks. It's the very end of chapter 2 on top of page 34. From this systemic perspective, racism has absolutely nothing to do with what's in your heart, your brain, or even your intentions. It's all about how your actions or inactions allow the dynamics that are already in place to move you in a certain direction. And as Melissa was talking about, that it's all built upon the same thing with white supremacy at its root. I too clearly saw in that moment, oh yes, this affects everything. And so very, very, my heart is full after an hour of being with, like we all said, 10 people that we don't know. So thank you for coming. Here's what I think we do moving forward. We've got this scheduled to be not next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday from 6:30 to 7:30. Again, I'll also let it run for 90 minutes so that we, if we go over, we can go over. We will post this video if people want it or want to share it with somebody after the computer saves it or whatever. And also, if anybody knows how to create something that's easy to participate, like midweek, where anyone could join and even post in the moment, hey, I just read this thing, I wonder, so we don't necessarily have to wait 2 weeks to get back to the juice that's happening as we go through different things that we might be thinking about, and even if there could be a leader for that, and Jessica could lead us through that, but I'll let that all happen as it goes. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing in a space that we've not earned your trust necessarily, and you gave it to us. And I know it just was absolutely everything, just listening to everybody converse back and forth and ask the questions they were asking. I just had a great time. So if anybody has anything, or all hearts clear, I don't want to shut the door on anybody if there's something that needs to be said. And let's see what Jess said. You'll be sending the next set of meeting invites out. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, that could be something like that could work. So yeah, and I'll rely heavily, I'm not the greatest at this kind of thing. It's a miracle we all got on here tonight. So well, I'll lean on others that are better at that. But again, thanks so much, and we'll talk soon to everybody. Good night. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It was nice meeting you all.
Thank you.